Rainier Crest Medical Center glowed against the Seattle evening like a glass ship run aground. The last of the sun slid along its windows, turning every pane on the east wing into strips of copper light. Inside the building hummed with a softer energy. Voices were low, footsteps were slower. The rush of the day had thinned to a tired rhythm. Emily Rhodes stood in the main surgical corridor and closed her eyes for a breath. Behind the doors on either side, monitors kept up their steady, precise beeping. Different rooms, different patients, one sound. She could have picked it out of any noise in the world. To her, it always felt like the pulse of the hospital itself. A pair of automatic doors hissed open behind her. The smell of cold air and stale coffee drifted in. "You keep listening like that, Rhodes, you're going to start syncing your heart rate to the machines," a voice said. She opened her eyes and glanced back. Dr. Aaron Malik stood there in scrubs that had seen too many hours and a hoodie tied around his waist. He held 2 paper cups in one hand, his dark hair flattened by a surgical cap that he had given up on wearing properly. "Pretty sure mine is already faster," Emily said. "Is that one for me, or are you double-fisting again?" He handed her a cup. "You just walked a 17-year-old's aorta back from the edge. I'm not letting you fall over in the hallway." The coffee was lukewarm and bitter. It still tasted like relief. The OR doors at the end of the hall swung open. The team wheeled out a tall, pale boy, his chest swaddled in clean white dressings. His eyelashes fluttered under the sedation. A nurse ran a palm down his arm in a small, reassuring stroke that he would never remember. "You did good in there," Malik said quietly. Emily took another sip and watched the boy roll past. "We did." He made a soft sound that might have been agreement. Then his gaze shifted to the glass observation pane of OR3. Victor Hale stood there on the other side of the glass. He was out of scrubs and back in the tailored charcoal suit that had become part of the hospital's public image. The tie was loose at his throat. The white of his shirt looked almost too bright under the surgical lights that still burned inside the empty room. For a second, his reflection doubled in the glass. Emily saw 2 versions of him overlap, one solid, one ghosted. When he noticed them, he stepped through the door into the corridor. "Nice work today," Hale said. His voice was mild, as if they had just finished a routine meeting instead of a high-risk emergency. "The family's still in the waiting room. That boy's mother was shaking so hard I thought she might pass out." "We will update her on the way out," Malik said. "She can breathe now." Hale's gaze slid to Emily and stayed there for a moment longer than felt casual. "You kept your head." She felt a small involuntary warmth under her ribs. "Team effort, she answered. One corner of his mouth lifted. On the glossy posters in the main lobby, that curve of his lips always looked like sincere reassurance, a tidy gesture that matched the tagline about compassion and innovation. Up close under clinic white lights and the smell of iodine, it looked thinner. "I am due upstairs, Hale said. "Try not to save any more lives tonight. The paperwork will kill us." Malik snorted. "Tell that to the ear." Hale turned away the soles of his shoes, whispering on the polished floor. As he walked past the glass panel, the sunset outside cut through, splitting his silhouette with a stripe of orange light. Emily watched him disappear around the corner. For a second, there was an odd pressure in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. She could not have said why. In the staff lounge, she finally peeled off her gloves. Her fingers were wrinkled and pale from hours of sweat and scrub soap. She let the water run over them, hot at first, then cooler until the skin prickled back to awareness. Someone had left a takeout box open on the counter. It smelled like garlic and something fried. On the wall above the sink, a muted television looped a Rainier Crest commercial. The volume was off, but she had seen it enough to fill in the sound. Hale stood in the atrium, all glass and greenery behind him, talking about transparency and community care. The words were simple, sharp, practiced. There was a moment a few weeks earlier when those words had sounded different in her head. Rain had been hammering the windows that day, blurring the view of the parking deck into gray streaks. Emily had been walking past the executive suite with a stack of charts pressed against her chest. A call light had buzzed in her pocket, and she had shifted the folders to reach for her phone. The top file slipped. Papers fanned out over the carpet. As she knelt to gather them, a voice floated through the slightly open door ahead of her. "If this gets out, we are finished," Hale said. His tone was low and flat. There was no microphone in front of him, no camera. "I do not care what you have to rename or reclassify. Fix the numbers." The words were a fist at the base of her neck. She looked up, suddenly aware of the open door. Through the narrow gap, she saw only a slice of his office. A glass wall, a framed certificate, the shadow of Hale pacing. Someone answered on speaker, their voice too muffled to make out distinct words, only a pattern of stressed vowels and apologies. Emily had hovered one hand on a folder, waiting for the right instinct. Knock, cough, move away. It had felt like standing in the wrong room by accident. She had chosen to move. Quiet steps backward, careful not to scuff the carpet, her arms loaded with scattered pages. She told herself it was not her business. Administrators talked about numbers that way all the time. Budgets, donors, grants, all of it lived in a language that had never really belonged to her. When she turned her elbow, clipped a metal cart. The pen tray rattled. For a second, everything in the hall seemed too loud. The door opened fully. Hale stepped into view. The phone on his desk still blinked an active call, tiny red light pulsing. His eyes, normally so measured during press conferences, were sharper now, almost bright. "Emily," he said. She swallowed. "I'm sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. I dropped some charts." He looked down at the files clutched to her chest, then at the cart, then back at her face. The pause lasted just long enough for the air to feel thin. "Long day, he... done?" "Fantastic?" "Yes," she said, "but a good one." There was another beat of silence. His expression rearranged itself into something smoother. "Keep it up," he said, and went back inside. The door closed with a soft, final click. That sound had stayed with her longer than she admitted. Now, in the lounge, the commercial ended on Hale's image. The screen cut to a shot of the city skyline and the hospital logo. Emily flicked the TV off, dried her hands on a paper towel, and checked the clock above the doorway. 7:37 p.m., almost there. Back at the nurse's station, Nate Collins was juggling a tray of medication cups like they were live explosives. "You look like you were about to defuse a bomb," Emily said, dropping her pen onto the counter beside him. He exhaled in a rush. "I keep thinking I'm going to mix up someone's beta blockers with their stool softener and get fired." "You are not," she said. "You are going to read the labels twice, and you are going to remember that 90% of this job is not panicking while everyone else does." He laughed, the tension easing off his shoulders. "Is that in the handbook?" "It should be." She signed off on the last chart, the tip of her pen scratching a final rhythm over paper. Her body felt heavy and used in the familiar way. Back of the neck tight, ankles sore, a good kind of tirelessly. As she slid the file into the cabinet, movement in the polished glass door caught her eye. At the far end of the corridor, Victor Hale stood very still. The overhead lights carved his outline into clean edges. His suit jacket hung open, his hands were hidden in his pockets, shoulders faintly hunched as if the weight on them had shifted, and he had not found a place to set it down. Their eyes met across the distance. Emily straightened a little. "Long day," she called, voice echoing off tile and glass. For a heartbeat, he did not answer. His gaze flicked quick toward a row of closed office doors, then back to her. "Longer than you think," he said. The words were almost conversational. The way he said them was not. A chill moved down her arms, fine and quick, like cold air from a vent. She told herself she was simply overdue for sleep. The fluorescent lights sometimes played tricks at this hour. Everyone in the building carried their own private storm by the end of a shift. Hale gave a small nod as if something had been decided inside his own head and walked away down the hall. His reflection stretched beside him on the waxed floor until the turn in the corridor cut it off. Emily watched the empty space he left behind for a moment, listening to the steady beep of a monitor in a nearby room and the faint squeak of a cartwheel somewhere around the corner. Then she gathered her things, clicked off the desk lamp, and started toward the locker room, the soles of her shoes whispering along the same corridor he had just crossed. The hospital lights hummed above her, bright and indifferent. In the locker room, the air smelled like detergent and old coffee. Metal doors stood in two facing rows, a narrow aisle between them. Emily opened hers and tucked her bag onto the top shelf. Her reflection wavered in the dented metal, a pale face with tired eyes and a faint line from the mask across the bridge of her nose. She pulled on her jacket fingers slower than usual. The fabric caught on the hospital ID still clipped to her scrub top, and she had to untangle it. When she closed the locker, the door clicked, a small harmless sound that seemed loud in the quiet room. Outside in the corridor, the hospital kept breathing. Carts rolled somewhere on the floor above. A cleaner pushed a mop bucket past, humming under his breath. Far away, someone laughed, then hushed the sound as if remembering where they were. Emily stepped out, holding a stack of last-minute charts against her hip. The corridor stretched ahead of her, bright and empty, the polished tile throwing back reflections of overhead lights. A wheelchair sat parked against one wall, its footrests lined up like folded wings. She walked toward the nurse's station, the soles of her shoes whispering with each step. Her body wanted to go home. Muscles ached in that familiar, satisfying way. Her head felt oddly light. At the station, she set the charts down and pulled a pen from the cup. She began to sign off orders in short strokes, the ink sinking into the paper in thin blue lines. Her wrist worked on autopilot. She paused once to adjust the angle of the desk lamp, tilting it away from her eyes. Behind the counter, a glass window looked out onto the hallway. In it, she could see herself in pieces, the back of her head, her hand moving, the swing of the door at the far end. That door moved now. Just a sliver at first, then wide. Someone stepped out. For a second, the reflection distorted. She did not turn. She wrote the date one more time, signed her initials. A sound cut through the hum of the lights. Metal on metal, sharp, distinct, not a cart, not a locker. Click. The pen stopped in her hand. Emily lifted her head. The hair on her arms rose as if a cold draft had slid along the floor at ankle height. The glass in front of her caught the corridor behind. The tiny reflection showed a dark shape near the far end. She turned around. Victor Hale stood in the hallway. He was closer than he had been earlier, halfway between her and the corner where the corridor turned. The suit jacket he had worn before was unbuttoned. The tie was gone. His shirt was open at the collar. His face held no expression she recognized from board meetings, from commercials, from glossy brochures. His right arm was extended. In his hand, a gun. For one stunned second, the object did not match anything in her mind. Her brain offered other options. Pager, phone, clipboard. Then the weight of his posture, the line of his fingers forced the world into focus. "Hale," she said. It came out a whisper. Her throat felt dry. He did not answer. His eyes were wrong. Not angry, not wild, but hollowed out. As if someone had scooped out everything familiar and left behind a single hard thought. Behind him, a cleaner with headphones in rounded the far corner. The man took in the scene in a heartbeat, the outstretched arm, the glint of metal. The mop handle clattered from his hand. He staggered backward, yanked the headphones out, and bolted the way he had come, shoes slapping the tile. Emily's body caught up with what her eyes saw. "Victor!" she tried again louder. "Put that down!" The gun rose a fraction higher. The muscles in his forearm trembled. For a moment, his gaze flicked to the side toward a set of closed office doors, then back to her. "This was not supposed to happen," he said. There was no one else in the hall now. The hospital felt suddenly smaller, every exit farther away. She took a step forward before she realized it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The monitor in the nearest patient room beeped at a steady rate. She heard it clear and regular. "Hale," she said, her voice low, almost conversational. "Whatever this is, it can be fixed another way." His jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Then the gun fired. The first shot cracked the space between them. The sound slammed into her ears. Light from the overhead fixtures seemed to flare. A framed print of a mountain landscape on the wall behind her shattered glass, raining in a glittering spray. Something hot seared across her side. Her breath knocked out of her. The charts on the counter leaped and slid. The second shot came before she could process the first. The recoil jolted his shoulder. The bullet tore through the edge of the nurse's station, splintering wood. A shard caught her arm. Pain bloomed like heat. She stumbled backward. The world narrowed. The taste of copper filled her mouth. He fired again. Third, fourth, fifth. Each flash painted his face in white light. The corridor echoed metal ringing against walls. A ceiling tile shook loose dust. One of the rounds hit her square in the chest. The impact lifted her, then dropped her. The tiles rushed up. Her head struck the floor, sound exploding behind her eyes. Air would not come. She lay on her side, vision tilted. The ceiling tilted with it. Somewhere a monitor alarm began to blare. Someone screamed. A door slammed open. Footsteps scattered. She tried to inhale. Her lungs refused. Heat radiated from her torso, beating like a second cruel heart. Her hands moved without instructions, searching for the worst of it, finding only warmth that soaked her fingers. Why? The word did not form fully on her tongue. It floated in her head, heavy and slow. She thought of the boy they had just saved. Of his mother in the waiting room, fingers twisted in the strap of her purse. Of the rain against the executive windows when she had heard that call. Of Hale's eyes across the glass. The gun clattered on tile. Her gaze slid sideways. Hale stared at her from down the hall. The rage had drained from his face. In its place for a heartbeat was something like horror. His lips parted, but no sound reached her. Then he turned and ran. His figure blurred at the edges as he vanished around the corner. His footsteps faded, replaced by a tidal rush of other sounds. Code blue, surgical corridor, now. She has been shot. Call security. Hands closed on her shoulders, her arms gathering her up. The world lurched as she was rolled onto a backboard. A mask pressed over her mouth and nose. Air tried to force itself into her. "Stay with me, Emily," a voice said near her ear. "Malik." She could not turn her head, could not tell him she was trying. The corridor lights streaked above as they pushed her gurney down the hall. White, blinking past. The alarm of her own monitor blended with the buzz of wheels, the bark of orders, the click of doors slamming open to clear a path. The operating room doors burst inward. The same room she had left not long before now waited with empty table, fresh sterile packs, another set of overhead lights. They lifted her onto the table, rolled her cut-through fabric. Cold air hit skin that had been warm and wet. Gloved hands moved fast, searching for entry wounds, pressing on arteries, placing lines. Pressure is dropping. We are losing her. Get me O negative now. The voices fired over her head. They did not sound like words anymore, more like waves cresting and breaking. Her vision stuttered. For a moment it sharpened. She saw Malik's face above hers. His mask hid his mouth, but his eyes were wide and fierce, the calm humor gone. You are not going anywhere, he said. Not tonight. The anesthetic fog crept in. The edges of the room smudged. The beeping next to her head sped up, then slowed, then smoothed into a high constant tone. Flat. Silence followed, a different kind of quiet, dense and heavy. Charge. Pads pressed against her chest. The smell of singed fabric and skin burned through the antiseptic. Clear. Her body jerked. The world jumped with it. The flat line broke. The monitor answered with a tentative blip. Then another. Then a third. Got it, someone breathed. We have a rhythm. Outside the walls of the operating room, Rainier Crest convulsed. Police cars screamed up to the emergency entrance, red and blue lights splashing across the glass facade. Officers rushed in, weapons-drawn voices cutting through the lobby, yellow tape unspooled across the main hall. Patients leaned into their doorways, IV poles beside them. Nurses pushed them gently back, voices soft but firm. A local news van pulled up at the curb. A reporter in a suit tugged at his tie, speaking quickly to a camera as a producer counted down on her fingers. Authorities confirm an active shooter incident inside Rainier Crest Medical Center. He said, words sharp in the cool night air. Sources say the hospital's own chief executive officer is involved. On the upper floor near the executive offices, a cluster of tactical gear and dark uniforms gathered outside a closed door. One officer pounded the panels with a gloved fist, while another called through a bullhorn voice measured and steady. Dr. Hale, this is the Seattle Police Department. Open the door. Inside his office, behind blinds drawn crookedly, a single shadow moved. The window glass reflected the flashes of sirens, red and blue, chasing each other across the panes. Back in the OR, stitches bit skin, dressing sealed red into white. The beeps beside Emily's head settled into an uneven, stubborn pattern. Hours later, she lay in a dim corner of the intensive care unit, pale against the sheets, wrapped in the quiet companionship of machines. Tubes and lines traced careful paths from her arms and chest to pumps and bags. The monitor at her bedside flicked green light across her face. Nate sat in the chair near her feet, elbows on his knees, hands laced together. His scrubs were spattered, his sneakers streaked with something that had once been bright. He watched the tiny peaks on the screen, one after another, each one a small, bright insistence. Come on, Rhodes, he murmured. Keep going. The hospital lights hummed above them, bright and indifferent. The world came back in pieces. First was the sound. A slow, patient beeping softer than the harsh alarms from the operating room, steady enough that it felt almost kind. Air moved somewhere close by, a mechanical sigh, in and out, in and out. Then came the light. It pressed through her eyelids, thin and pale, not the sharp white of surgical lamps. A muted glow. Something filtered it, a curtain or a blind. Smell arrived last. Antiseptic plastic, a faint hint of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The familiar cocktail of a place she knew too well. Emily opened her eyes. A ceiling came into focus above her, off-white tiles, with a tiny pattern of pinholes. One of them had a small brown mark in the corner. She stared at it for a few seconds, following the line of it out toward the sprinkler head, until she realized she could not move her neck without effort. Her throat felt scraped raw. Breathing hurt in a dull way, like someone had stacked heavy books on her chest. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Something tugged gently at her right hand. She turned her eyes instead of her head. An IV line snaked from the back of her hand, taped down with neat strips of white. Her skin, usually a warm light brown, was washed out, nearly matching the sheet. The beeping belonged to the monitor beside her. Green peaks climbed and sank in a rhythm that did not care whether she was watching. She swallowed. The action sent a cough scraping up from deep inside. It pulled pain through her ribs and across her side. A shape moved in her peripheral vision. The scrape of a chair sounded, then a sudden stillness. Emily. She shifted her gaze. Dr. Malik sat in a chair near the head of the bed. His eyes had deep shadows under them, his hair flattened and wild where he had run his hands through it. A paper cup rested on the floor by his shoe. The look on his face told her more than anything else. Relief. Fear. Something like anger, but not at her. She tried to speak, only air came out. He reached for a small plastic cup of water and a straw. Here, he said. Small sips. The water was lukewarm and tasted faintly of the hospital pipes. It felt like the best thing she had ever had. When she could manage a word, it came out in a rasp. What happened? He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. You were shot, he said quietly. In the surgical corridor. Do you remember any of that? The corridor, the charts, the sound, metal, his arm, the flash. Her heart rate ticked up on the monitor. The machine tattled on her. She closed her eyes for a second as the memory rolled through her chest like a freight train. When she opened them, she stared at a wrinkle in the blanket. "Hale," she whispered. Malik nodded. There was no surprise in the gesture, only a tired acceptance. "Ian, did I—" Her tongue felt clumsy. She swallowed again. "Did I make it up?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not in a smile. "No, you did not make it up." She tried to wet her lips. "How bad?" "You took multiple rounds," he said. His voice shifted into something clipped and professional. "One through soft tissue here." He touched the air above her side, not making contact. "One grazed your arm, one chest. They got lucky with placement, and we got lucky with timing. We were already here." "Lucky," she repeated the word thin. Silence stretched between them. The monitor kept on unbothered. "Is he—" She did not know how to end the question. "Alive," Malik answered. "In custody." He looked toward the glass window that separated her ICU room from the hall. A blind was half drawn. Through the gap, Emily saw a sliver of corridor, a passing pair of shoes, the wheel of a cart. "There are police everywhere," he added. "Reporters outside. It is a circus." A shadow passed behind the blind. Two figures in suits paused by the glass, their outlines blurred in the frosted strip. Malik glanced at them, then at Emily. "They want to talk to you," he said. "Not now. Later, when you are stronger. Detectives and someone from the state. They are trying to figure out why the hell the CEO of a major hospital walked down a hallway with a gun." Emily let the words sit. She tried to picture Hale's face as he had looked in that moment. The emptiness in his eyes, the way his hand had shaken around the grip. The shock that had crossed his features after she fell. "I do not understand," she said. "Join the club," Malik replied. The figures outside moved on. Another pair replaced them, these in darker suits, slower step. One of them held a tablet, the screen glowing bluish against the glass. A nurse slipped into the room, checked the lines, and the monitor made a note on a handheld device. Her scrubs rustled softly. She touched Emily's wrist with two fingers, checking the pulse even though the monitor already displayed it. "How are you feeling, Emily?" the nurse asked. Emily considered lying. "Like I have been hit by a truck," she said instead. The nurse's eyes softened above her mask. "Vital signs are holding," she said. "Pain." Emily nodded. "I will let the team know you are stable." The nurse squeezed her forearm gently and left. Stable. The word felt strange, detached. When the door closed, Malik leaned back in his chair. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Do you remember anything before the shooting?" he asked. "That might matter." She stared at him. "Matter how?" He hesitated. There was weight behind the pause. "Investigators are looking at him," he said. "At his decisions. They have been digging into the financials. I have heard bits. Missing money. Grants that did not go where they were supposed to go. Whatever this is, it is bigger than him losing his temper." The call. The memory of rain on glass rose, sudden and sharp. The phone blinking. His voice saying, "Fix the numbers." Her papers scattered on the carpet. Emily felt her fingers curl slightly against the sheet. "I heard him once," she said, "on the phone, weeks ago." Malik's eyes sharpened. "What did he say?" She repeated it as close as she could. The words were clear in her mind, as if someone had recorded them. "They might have nothing to do with this, she said afterward. She was not sure whether she was trying to convince him or herself. "People talk about budgets all the time." He shook his head slowly. "Not like that." Outside the glass, the door of the ICU pod slid open. One of the dark-suited figures stepped inside. Up close, her face came into focus. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, blonde hair pulled back tight from a thoughtful forehead. Gray eyes that moved like they were used to reading rooms instead of charts. She wore a plain black blazer, no jewelry besides a watch, and a hospital visitor badge clipped neatly at her hip. "Dr. Malik," she said. Her voice held a slight rasp, like someone who drank too much office coffee and not enough water. "Sorry to interrupt. I am Mara Jensen, forensic accountant with the State Health Commission." "Convenient timing," Malik said. It came out more dry than rude. She allowed the comment to pass. Her attention shifted to Emily. "Ms. Rhodes," Mara said, "good to see you awake." Emily searched her face for impatience for accusation. She found neither. Only a contained kind of urgency. "I am not sure I would call it good," Emily said. A hint of a smile touched the corner of Mara's mouth. "You survived a close-range shooting," she replied. "In my line of work, that qualifies." She moved closer to the bed, stopping short of the lines and wires. She glanced at the monitor, then back at Emily. "I know this is early, Wasta," Mara said. "Medically and probably emotionally. There is no rush to get everything right this second, but I wanted you to see a face attached to the word investigation. Investigation, Emily repeated. We are looking at Dr. Hale, Mara said, and at the systems that let him operate the way he did. Your name is in a lot of the reports. The nurse he shot, the one who worked most closely with certain departments, the one who was seen near his office a few times before things started to unravel. Emily felt her skin prickle even under the blanket. I was just doing my job. I am sure, Mara says. Mara said, which is why your perspective matters. She slipped a small notebook from her pocket, then paused as if deciding against opening it. Her fingers rested on the cover instead. I am not here to interrogate you, she said. Not today. I wanted to ask one simple thing. Emily waited. If anything about his behavior ever felt wrong, off strange, Mara said, whether it made sense to you at the time or not, would you be willing to talk to me about it when you feel ready? There it was, the choice wrapped in polite phrasing. Emily looked at Malik. His gaze met hers without pressure, only a steady presence. The memory of the phone call pressed at her the tone in Hale's voice that had scraped against her instincts the way his eyes had held hers a little too long in the hall. Her chest hurt when she took a deeper breath. The monitor answered with a small spike. Yes, she said. The word came out hoarse. She cleared her throat. I will talk. Mara nodded once as if they had agreed on something ordinary like a meeting time. Then I will come back when you are stronger, she said. She tucked the notebook away and stepped back. For a moment she studied the glass wall, the reflection of the corridor lights in it, the thin line of yellow tape she could see further down. This place runs on trust, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Trust and numbers. Both of those have been abused. She caught herself straightened and looked at Emily again. Rest. Let the doctors do their part. When you can sit up without feeling like you have been hit by a truck, we will sit down and compare what you know with what the bank records say. After she left the room felt smaller partly from the weight of her words, partly from the sudden absence of motion. Malik rose from his chair, stretching his back until it popped. I'm going to check on a few other patients, he said. He said, I will be back. Emily nodded. When he was gone and the nurse had finished another round of quiet checks, the room settled into a muted quiet. The only sounds were the soft whir of a pump and the monitor at her bedside marking each beat in green light. She stared at the glass panel at her own blurred reflection and listened to that sound, steady and insistent. 3 days blurred into a slow tide of light and footsteps beyond the glass. Emily slept in short stretches. When she woke, the room always looked the same. Monitors, shadows of people passing, the blind over the window adjusted to different positions. Sometimes the slats were half open and she could see the corner of the nurse's station. Sometimes they were almost closed, just a strip of corridor visible. The news made its way in even when the television stayed off. Voices in the hall, snatches of conversation. They said it was personal. They said it was money. She is the nurse from the story, the one who survived. Once in the middle of the night, a security officer stopped outside her door with a young volunteer who wore an oversized badge. The volunteer peeked through the glass wide-eyed, as if looking at something from a screen that had slipped into real life. That is her mausoleum. Is para her, the officer said quietly. Back to the desk, please. In the morning, a nurse brought a folded newspaper onto the bedside table. Emily did not ask for it. The front page had a photo of Rainier Crest under floodlights, police tape bright yellow across the entrance. A headline ran across the top. Hospital. CEO arrested after shooting staff member. She did not read the article. The picture was enough. The building she knew turned into a backdrop for text about crime scenes and scandals. By the 5th day, she could sit up a little without feeling like the world tipped sideways. Her lungs protested, but the pain had lost some of its sharpness. The doctor spoke in cautious terms. Stable. Improving. Watching for complications. That afternoon, Mara came back. She knocked before entering a small courtesy in a place where doors were usually opened without warning. She carried a slim folder this time, no laptop. Permission to come in, she asked. Too late to be anonymous now, Emily said. Her voice stayed quiet, but it had more strength. Mara took the chair that Malik usually used. He was not there. He had gone to scrub in on a long case reluctantly after Emily told him he was starting to look like a permanent fixture. The folder rested on Mara's knees. She did not open it right away. How are you feeling? She asked. I have felt worse, Emily said. I have also felt much better. That fits the chart, so Mara said. You look less like you are about to evaporate. There was no pity in her tone. It helped. Emily sank back against the pillows. You said you would come back when I could sit up without feeling like I had been hit by a truck. And can you, Mara asked. Feels more like a small car now. Progress. For a moment, they simply shared the sound of the monitor. After everything that had filled her days lately, the space felt almost gentle. May I ask you some questions, Mara said. Go ahead. This time she did open the folder. Inside were printed pages, some with numbers, some with short blocks of text. Colored tabs stuck out the side in neat rows. We have been through months of financial records, Mara said. There are patterns, money moved out of research grants into shell accounts, equipment budgets that look inflated then siphoned. On paper, it is precise and distant. I need the human side of it. Who was in the rooms? Who answered phones? Who looked like they were watching doors? That is a strange detail, Emily said. Strange details are the ones that break cases, Mara replied. She asked about the day of the rain and the phone call. Emily walked her through it again. The wet carpet, the blinking light on Hale's phone, the way his voice had gone flat, the sensation of being somewhere she was not supposed to be. Mara wrote a few phrases, nothing more. She asked about other times, meetings that were moved, deliveries that seemed off, conversations cut short when certain people walked by. Emily found memories she had not realized were stored. A vendor who had dropped equipment off at odd hours and never spoke to anyone but a single administrator. A research nurse who had complained quietly that promised funds never reached her department. A set of brochures about a community clinic partnership that no one had ever seen open. Why did you not report any of this earlier? Mara asked. The question was simple. It did not carry blame. It still landed with weight. Emily stared at her hands. The bruises on her arms were fading to yellow and green. I told myself it was above my pay grade, she said. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I did not have the full picture. She lifted her eyes. And he was who he was, she said. The face of the hospital, the man from the commercials. It is hard to believe a glossy poster could shoot you in a hallway until it does. Mara's pen stopped moving. That, she said quietly, is the human side. They went on for nearly an hour. At the end of it, Emily felt more wrung out than she had after the first time she walked to the window with a physical therapist. Talking pulled at different muscles. When Mara closed the folder, her expression had changed in a subtle way. Some pattern in her mind had clicked into place. Thank you, she said. You filled in gaps I did not know I had. Emily tried to smile. Glad to be useful. You are more than useful, Mara said. Then she seemed to catch herself, as if she had almost said something less controlled. I will be in touch again. There will be formal statements, depositions, lawyers. I will make sure you are not ambushed. After she left, the room felt heavier. Words like deposition and lawyers lingered in the air. By the end of the week, the media presence outside had grown. The hospital PR department tried to keep things contained, but cameras still found angles. Through the television on mute, Emily saw herself once a blurry shot from a gurney as she was rushed past. A red circle highlighted her silhouette. Online people argued in comment sections and short texts that blinked quickly in and out of existence. Malik showed her one headline on his phone, then regretted it when he saw the look on her face. Hale's nurse speaks for the first time, it said over a photo of her from a staff newsletter, smiling stiffly at a charity event. I did not speak, she said. Not to them, he replied. To the people who matter you did. Some staff watched her with obvious sympathy when she was moved from ICU to a private room on a quieter floor. Others kept their eyes on the floor. The hospital was a small city. Everyone had an opinion. Not everyone wanted it known. One afternoon, a respiratory therapist she barely knew stopped by with an extra blanket. Our union is talking with the board, she murmured as she tucked the corners in. About oversight, about how this got this far, just so you know. Emily nodded. The idea that people were meeting in rooms she could not see and saying her name did not get less strange. When she was strong enough to sit in a chair beside the window, Mara came back with another visitor. The man this time wore a gray suit and a tie that looked like it had been knotted too many times. His hair had a bald spot at the crown. He carried a thin briefcase and a folder thicker than Mara's. Ms. Rhodes, he said, shaking her hand gently. I am Assistant District Attorney Cole. I will be leading the prosecution team in the case against Victor Hale. The word case landed like a stone in clear water. Mara stood near the wall arms loosely crossed, watching both of them. I want to be clear, Cole said. You are not under any kind of suspicion. You are a victim of a violent crime. You are also an important witness. The defense will likely try to turn you into something else. An unhappy employee, a person with a grudge, someone unstable from trauma. Our job is to make sure the jury sees you as what you are. And what is that? Emily asked. A professional who did her job and nearly died for it, Cole said. He sat and opened his folder. Inside were formatted pages with sections highlighted. Some lines were underlined. There were printed photos too, most of them aerial shots of the hospital corridors, diagrams with arrows that showed angles and distances. We are going to ask you to testify, Westake. Uniform, he said, under oath, to tell a room full of strangers what happened in that hallway and anything relevant that happened before it. I know that is not an easy thing to do. You can say no. No one can force you. Emily thought of the corridor, the glass, the sound of the click, the way the bullets had sounded like they were puncturing more than walls. She thought of the research nurse who never got her funding, of the patient families who had trusted the logo on the building, of the way Hale had spoken on the phone when he thought no one was listening. Her chest ached. The scar tissue tugged when she took a deeper breath. If I say no, she asked, what happens? We still have a case, Kiyusi, Cole said. We have records. We have other witnesses. It is stronger if the jury hears from you. You are the person he chose to shoot in public inside the place he controlled. That says something about what he was afraid of. The idea turned in her mind. Poverty of courage, fear of exposure, fear of losing control. She looked at Mara. Mara held her gaze steady and neutral, but there was something in her eyes that felt like respect. I will testify, Emily said. Cole nodded slowly as if he had learned to move carefully around fragile things. All right, he said, then we will prepare you. He spent the next hour walking her through what would happen in a courtroom, where she would sit, who would ask questions, how the defense might try to twist details. He asked her to describe the shooting in as much detail as she could manage. He listened without interrupting, only stopping once to ask her to slow down so he could note a specific phrase. By the time he left, the sun had slid behind the neighboring building. The window glass reflected the room back at her, turning it into a floating picture. She could see herself in it, sitting upright, a thin hospital blanket over her legs, scars under the gown, lines in her face that had not been there a few weeks ago. The monitor beside her head continued its steady work. Beep, beep. Each sound a reminder that she was still here, still occupying space in a story that other people were now writing reports about. She reached out and touched the cool surface of the glass. Her reflection met her fingertips, faint and double. The courthouse in downtown Seattle looked less like a place of drama and more like a stack of stone boxes. On the morning of the trial, its front steps crawled with people. Reporters bunched near the bottom cameras on tripods, microphones sprouting logos. Police kept them behind a low metal barrier. Beyond that, lawyers in dark suits climbed the steps with thin briefcases and tired expressions. Emily waited in a side entrance away from the main crowd. The hallway there smelled of floor polish and stale air. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was not so different from a hospital corridor if she ignored the portraits of judges lining the walls. Assistant District Attorney Cole stood beside her thumb, sliding along the edge of a file. His tie had a new crease, but the same wear as before. Mara leaned against the wall opposite them, arms loosely folded, her eyes moving between Emily and the door. You can still change your mind about going in the front, Cole said. I am not going through that, Emily replied, tilting her head toward the main stairs. I have had enough of people pointing cameras at me while I am on a stretcher. He nodded as if he had expected that. A security officer opened the side door and gestured them through. They passed through a metal detector, the faint beep sounding when Emily forgot about the small metal clip on her sling. The guard waved her on with a quiet apology. The courtroom was smaller than she had imagined. Rows of wooden benches, a rail that separated public from counsel tables. The judge's bench at the far end raised just enough to change the angle of everything. When Emily stepped in, the low hum of conversation dropped a notch. She kept her eyes forward. Cole guided her to a seat at the first row of benches just behind the prosecution table. Victor Hale sat at the defense table on the other side of the aisle. He wore a dark suit that fit a little too loosely at the neck. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven. His eyes, when he glanced up, looked smaller than she remembered. There was a faint sallowness under them, a late middle age that had not shown on the hospital posters. For a brief moment their eyes met. A flash of recognition, then something unreadable. He looked away first. The judge entered and everyone rose. Conversations shut down like switches flipped off. When they sat again, a different weight settled over the room. Cole gave the opening statement for the state. He did not raise his voice. He walked the jury through timelines, through numbers and names, through the picture of a man who had controlled budgets and narratives, and then one night picked up a gun. You will hear evidence, Cole said, that Dr. Victor Hale directed funds away from community programs and research into accounts that existed on paper only. You will see records. You will hear from experts. You will hear from the people who saw those decisions from the inside. And you will hear how when questions began to close in, he chose to answer them with bullets, not with explanations. The defense attorney rose when Cole finished. She was a tall woman with a calm face, her voice smooth. She painted a different picture, A brilliant doctor under immense pressure, a man who had dedicated his life to saving others and lost himself in the demands placed on him. Dr. Hale is not a monster, she told the jury. He is a human being who broke under strain, made terrible choices in a moment of panic, and now stands here having already lost everything. We ask that you listen with that in mind. The first days of testimony focused on documents, bank statements, contracts, internal emails. Witnesses from the hospital finance department described discrepancies that had seemed small until they piled up. Mara took the stand on the third day. From her seat on the wooden bench, Emily watched her walk to the witness chair with the same measured steps she used in hospital corridors. Mara swore and then settled hands, resting lightly on the arms of the chair. Cole guided her through her findings. She spoke clearly, translating chains of transfers and shell entities into plain language. Charts glowed on screens beside the jury box, lines of money moving from legitimate accounts into companies with no staff, no physical address, only connections to a single signature. On paper, Mara said, it looks like ordinary business, but when you follow where the funds land, there is no medical equipment, no outreach clinics, no research trials. There is only Dr. Hale. The defense tried to suggest errors in the data, misinterpretations, overzealous conclusions. Mara answered each question steadily. No dramatics, no sarcasm, only a quiet confidence in the numbers. Then it was Emily's turn. Her name sounded different in the courtroom. Formal. Ms. Rhodes. The bailiff called it, and every head turned as she rose. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it was. Her chest pulled where the scars lay under her blouse. The railing brushed against her fingertips as she passed it. The air smelled of old wood and paper. She sat, placed her left hand on the Bible offered, lifted her right. The oath rolled past her words that judges and lawyers said every day. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Her palm tingled when she put it down. Cole approached first, his legal pad held low. Mrs. Rhodes, he said, can you tell the jury what your position was at Rainier Crest Medical Center earlier this year? I worked as a surgical nurse, she said. Her voice surprised her. It sounded smaller than it had in her own head, but steady. In the cardiac wing. He walked her through her history at the hospital, how long she had worked there, what her shift looked like, her responsibilities. The questions felt like a warm-up, letting the tension ease from her shoulders. Then he asked about the night. On the evening of March 14th, Cole said, where were you working? In the main surgical corridor, she said. We had just finished a cardiac surgery. She described the boy on the gurney, the relief in the waiting room, the ordinary fatigue that had settled over her shoulders. She could feel the courtroom listening breath held in expectation. She told them about the phone call she had overheard weeks before. The rain, the blinking light on Hale's phone, his words about fixing the numbers, the way she had backed away, telling herself it was not her concern. Then Cole asked, what happened in the corridor that night? The room shrank to the space between her and the jury. I was at the nurse's station, she said. I was signing off on charts. I heard a sound, metal on metal. I turned around. Dr. Hale was standing in the hallway holding a gun. Someone in the back of the gallery shifted, the wood creaking. She kept her eyes on the jurors, not on Hale. She described the sound of the first shot, the glass breaking the impact on her body. The taste of blood, the way air had refused to come, the sensation of the tiles against her cheek. She spoke slowly, pausing where she needed to, letting the images match the words. What did his face look like? Cole asked gently. She remembered it in pieces. The set of his jaw, the emptiness in his eyes, the flicker of something like shock after he lowered the gun. He did not look confused, she said. He did not look like someone who did not know what he was doing. He looked like someone who had already made a decision. Cole let that sit for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been waiting since the investigation began. Ms. Rhodes, in your opinion, based on what you saw and what you knew, why did he shoot you? Objections did not come. The judge watched quietly. The jury leaned forward by small degrees. For a long time I thought it was about me, Emily said. Something I had done wrong, some mistake. She took a breath. The microphone on the stand picked it up, a soft swell of air. But when I heard about the missing money, about the calls, about what he had been hiding, she said, it started to make sense in a different way. I worked in his hospital. I walked those hallways. I heard things I was not supposed to hear. I believe he did not see me as a person in that moment. He saw me as a risk. He did not shoot a nurse. He shot at the truth walking down his hallway. The words hung in the air. The courtroom seemed to tilt around them. She did not look at Hale. She looked at the jurors, at their faces, at the way some of them swallowed, at the way one woman in the front row blinked quickly and straightened a stack of notes for no reason. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere shifted. Her heels clicked softly on the floor as she approached. Ms. Rhodes, the attorney said, first let me say I am sorry for what you went through. Emily said nothing. There was no question to answer yet. You have been through a great deal of trauma, the attorney continued. Would you agree that traumatic events can affect memory? They can, Emily said. They did not erase it. The attorney asked whether Emily had ever disagreed with hospital administration, whether she had ever been written up, whether she had any reason to resent Dr. Hale. She asked if Emily was certain about the words she claimed to have overheard, if she might have misunderstood. Emily answered simply, no embellishments, no speeches. She admitted what she did not know. She repeated what she did know. I did not see the bank accounts, she said. I did not sign the checks. I heard his voice. I saw his face. I felt the bullets. That part I am sure of. After she stepped down, her legs felt strangely light. Cole guided her back to the bench. She sat and watched the rest of the proceedings through a kind of clear fog. Closing arguments arrived at last. Cole spoke of patterns of theft and an act of violence that fit into those patterns, not separate from them. The defense spoke of a man under pressure whose mind had cracked. The jury left. The courtroom emptied to a low murmur. Hours crawled by in the hallway outside, where dull benches lined the wall and vending machines hummed. Emily sat with Malik and Mara nearby. Cole paced in slow, short lines. When the bailiff finally called them back in, her stomach clenched in a way that had nothing to do with scars. Everyone rose when the judge returned. The jurors filed back into their box faces, carefully neutral. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a neat braid, held a folded paper. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, the foreperson said. The clerk took the paper, unfolded it, and read. On the charge of aggravated assault with a firearm, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, guilty. Each word landed with a small, solid impact. Guilty, guilty, guilty. A series of doors closing. Emily felt her breath leave her lungs in a slow exhale she had not realized she was holding. At the defense table, Hale sat very still. His shoulders dropped a fraction. His gaze fixed somewhere around the judge's bench did not waver. As he shifted, his glasses slipped from the bridge of his nose. They fell to the table and bounced once before sliding to the floor. The lens caught the light as it spun, then hit the tile and cracked. Rainier Crest looked different in daylight when Emily came back. The clouds over Seattle hung low, a soft gray ceiling. The glass front of the hospital captured the sky and broke it into rectangles. New shrubs had been planted along the walkway, small and still trying to decide whether to belong there. Her taxi pulled away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with a thin leather bag over her shoulder. The building's automatic doors waited a few steps ahead, the same doors she had walked through hundreds of times, the same doors the stretcher had rushed her through with sirens flashing behind. Her heart picked up speed. She could feel it under her ribs in a insistent beat. Behind the glass, a security officer stood at a podium. He saw her and straightened. Ms. Rhodes, he said when the doors parted, welcome back. His badge caught the lobby light. The lobby itself had a few new signs. Posters about transparency and patient advocacy hung where Hale's framed publicity photos had once been. Those frames were gone. The walls were blank in those spaces, as if the building was still deciding what to put there. Morning, Carl, Emily said. She had not known his name before all this. Now she did. She checked and clipped on a visitor badge out of habit before someone laughed and swapped it for a staff ID on a new blue lanyard. The word beneath her picture was different. Chief Clinical Officer. She held the plastic square in her hand for a moment. The photo had been taken a week earlier in an office with good lighting. She had not known how to smile for it. The result was something between cautious and determined. You really came back, a voice said behind her. Dr. Melick walked toward her from the elevators. He wore a white coat over scrubs, a pen tucked behind one ear. His grin made him look younger. I told you I would, she said. I know, he replied. Knowing something and seeing it are different things. They walked together to the main bank of elevators. People glanced at her, some openly, some sideways. A few nodded. A respiratory therapist raised a hand in a small wave. The volunteer from the ICU hallway lifted her clipboard like a salute. On the third floor, the doors opened to a familiar corridor. The waxed floors, the painted lines, the wall clocks ticking in their circular rhythm. At one turn, she slowed. The surgical hall. The last time she had seen it, it had been from a gurney, ceiling lights streaking past voices calling codes. Now the lights were softer. The walls were a warm off-white instead of stark. The artwork had been replaced with new prints, bright landscapes, and abstract shapes. The floor where she had bled was new tile, same color, but without the faint stains she had once known better than she wanted to. Near the nurse's station, a metal plaque gleamed on the wall. The letters were simple and straight. Rhodes Wing, for courage, integrity, and the pursuit of truth. Emily stepped closer and reached out. Her fingertips met cool metal. The reflection on its surface showed her face blurred and stretched. It was the board's idea, Malik said quietly. The name I mean, I only argued for the comma. She huffed a short breath that might have been a laugh. "I did not ask for this." "I know," he said. "That is why it feels right." The first weeks back were not ceremonial. There were no speeches, no balloons. Most days were meetings and quiet conversations, walks through departments with a notebook in hand. She sat with nurses in cramped break rooms and listened as they talked about understaffing, about double shifts, about times they had felt pushed to cut corners. She met with residents who described the pressure to document more and care less. She met with the finance team who showed her new procedures, double sign-offs, limits on any one person's control. In boardrooms that had once belonged to Hale's polished presence, she sat at the end of the long tables and spoke in a voice that was less smooth but more grounded. "We cannot erase what happened," she told them. "We can decide what we reward from now on." The new policies came not in a rush, but in a series of adjustments. An independent ethics committee with real authority. Quarterly open forums where staff could raise concerns in front of leadership without fear of retaliation. A patient advocacy office with a door that stayed open during working hours. Word of these changes filtered out into the city. When she walked through the cafeteria, she heard fewer whispered references to that night, and more about schedules, about cases, about normal things. Each ordinary complaint felt like proof that something was centering again. One afternoon, as she crossed the lobby, she saw Mrs. Alvarez sitting in a wheelchair near the windows. The older woman had been one of their regulars, in and out, with heart issues, always insisting on bringing her own blanket from home. "You look important," Mrs. Alvarez said, peering over her glasses at Emily's badge. "I look tired," Emily said. "The badge is new, that is all." The woman reached for her hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. "You kept coming back," she said. "That matters." Emily sat with her for a while, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. The city outside moved in its usual pace. Months turned into nearly a year. The scars on her chest and side faded from angry red to a softer, paler color. Some days she forgot about them until she caught sight of herself in a mirror. Other days they pulled when she lifted her arm to write on a whiteboard. The hospital took on a different tone. There were still emergencies, still losses, still nights when the monitors came together in a chorus of alarms. But behind that, there was a new habit. People asked questions when numbers did not look right. People talked across departments in ways they had not before. The trust that had cracked was not whole, but it was being rewoven. The invitation from Washington arrived in a plain envelope. She opened it at her kitchen table, the afternoon light falling across the printed seal. The letter was formal, the language polished. It spoke of service, of courage, of contributions that had rippled beyond one institution. When the day came, the sky over D.C. was a clear, pale blue. The White House did not glitter so much as glow quietly in the winter sun. Flags shifted in a faint breeze. Security lines snaked toward the entrance, filled with guests in their best clothes and staff in dark suits with earpieces. Inside the East Room, chandeliers spilled light over rows of chairs. Military officers in dress uniforms stood near the walls. Photographers clustered at the back. The air hummed with a low murmur that faded when the president entered. Emily sat in the second row, hands folded in her lap. The metal ribbon lay on a velvet cushion at the podium, white and blue and gold. She saw familiar faces in the crowd. Malik in an ironed suit that did not quite fit his shoulders, looking like he would rather be in scrubs. Mara in a dark dress, her notebook tucked away for once. A few nurses from Rainier Crest sat together, their hair done, their expressions half proud, half amazed at where they were. The president spoke about several people before her, a teacher who had shielded students, a scientist who had led a breakthrough. Each story rose and fell a different path under the same lights. Then he said her name, Emily Rhodes. She stood. The movement was smooth now, her chest pulled but mildly. She walked to the podium, each step measured. The room watched. The president's words washed over her in a concentrated version of everything she had heard over the past months. He spoke of a nurse who had been shot in the line of duty, who had chosen to speak, who had helped expose corruption in a system meant to care for the vulnerable, and who had returned to that system to help rebuild it. This honor recognizes not just survival, he said, but the choice to turn a moment of violence into a turning point for accountability and care. He lifted the Medal of Freedom from the cushion. The ribbon brushed the back of her neck as he placed it around her. The metal disc settled against her sternum, cool through the fabric of her dress. For a heartbeat, she was back in the corridor. Cold tile, hot pain, white light, the sound of the monitor sliding into a flat line. The beeping in her memory changed, became the flicker of cameras, the applause in the room, the soft clearing of a throat somewhere in the third row. She stepped to the microphone. The metal felt heavier than it looked. She rested a hand lightly on the edges of the podium to steady herself. "Thank you," she said. The microphones carried her voice out across the room into the lenses, into recordings that would play back later to people she would never meet. She did not give a long speech. She spoke of the people in her hospital, the nurses on night shift, the respiratory therapists, the housekeeping staff, the techs who drew blood at 3 a.m. She spoke of patients and families of trust placed in buildings of glass and concrete trust that deserved care. I did not do anything alone, she said. I stood in a hallway one night, and life made it impossible not to see what was wrong. Then other people chose to stand next to me. That is the only reason I'm here. When she finished, the applause rose again. Not a roar, but a sustained, steady sound like rain on a wide roof. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the clean, cold air. The White House lawn rolled away in careful lines. Beyond the fence, people waited with phones up. Some called her name, some simply watched. The metal caught the sunlight, sending a thin flare of brightness across her field of vision. She lifted her hand to touch it, feeling the engraved surface under her fingertips. She looked up. The sky stretched pale and high above the marble columns. For the first time in a long while, her chest expanded on a breath that did not hurt. "For the truth," she said under her breath. "Voice for the truth." A car waited to take her back to the hotel, and then a plane, and then a city under clouds. The hospital under those clouds would still be there. Monitors would still beep. Lights would still burn in hallways where people walked carrying charts and worries and hopes. She turned toward the waiting car, the metal cool and firm against her heart, and started down the steps. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.